Welcome to the Irish Pagan School podcast. Your hosts are authors and co-founders of the Irish Pagan School here in County Waterford, Ireland, Laura O'Brien and Jon O'Sullivan. Fáilte.
Who was the most important Druid during the Ulster Cycle of Ireland's mythology? Well, Dagdi agus Fáilte. Hi, hello and welcome. Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School. And ní Assa, not hard to say. The most important Druid during the Ulster Cycle for Ulster is in fact a guy called Cathbad. But most people think of the Ulster Cycle, and when they think of the heroes and the villains of Ulster Cycle, not many people center Cathbad in that narrative. It is, of course, the heroic or anti-heroic, I suppose, Cú Chulainn that people talk about. It is the king in Ulster, Conchobar. It is Queen Maeve of Connacht, Ailill, her partner. They maybe even throw in Fergus MacRoss. But Cathbad, though he is very influential and crucially important. In fact, nearly all of the stuff sent in the Ulster Cycle centers around Cathbad the Druid, but not many people realize that it is so. So in order to try and provide a little bit of context on who this guy is, first thing we need to look at is his name. He is known as Cathbad, but he is Cathbad MacRoss, Cathbad son of Ross. And the Cathbad son of Ross, maybe you'll already see the connection between him and Fergus son of Ross. Fergus son of Ross is king in Ulster before Conchobar takes over, and we'll loop back to that point, so do remember it. But Cathbad son of Ross is said to be a fierce champion in Ireland, and it was at the time of his naming he was a champion, but he was also a druid. And in the tidings of Conchobar, son of Nessa, which is the story that we hear of Cathbad centrally, really, it references him as going around Ireland and championing, which was pretty much getting into scraps. And so this druid or wizard, as he's referred to, Cathbad, son of Ross, while his brother is king up in Ulster, Cathbad goes out and he rebel rouses, he gets into scraps, championing Ulster around the rest of the island, specifically into Munster. And this is where things take the further steps along our path of how central Cathbad actually is to the whole Ulster cycle. Because whilst he is out championing, at the same time, there's another individual who is Ness. Well, actually, her name is Assa, son of Uchud, and she is a princess, and she has 12 foster fathers, and she is quite easygoing and very gentle in nature as a person, and that's why she's called Assa, which is the Irish word for easy or gentle. Not easy, just gentle, very kindly, very easygoing as a person. Now, it doesn't exactly say who is responsible, but all 12 of Assa's foster fathers are slain. They are all murdered, which then leads to Assa herself taking up the cause of championing. She begins to travel around herself, becoming a warrior, and then she becomes known as the ungentle or the unkind. And she then changes her name from Assa to Ní Assa, which becomes Nessa. And so she becomes Nessa, and as she travels around, she is pretty much scrapping and trying to find out who it was who murdered her 12 foster fathers. Now, Nessa, as we begin to know further down the line, is mother of Conchobar. He's known as Conchobar McNassa. He becomes king in Ulster after Fergus MacRoss, specifically because of some interactions related to Cathbad again. But for Conchobar to become king, of course, Conchobar needs to be born. And for Conchobar McNassa, he's known oddly or interestingly, he's referred to as Conchobar McNassa. He is referred to as Conchobar, son of Nessa, his mother's line. Whereas Fergus and even Cathbad are referred to Fergus MacRoss and Cathbad MacRoss. They're named son of their father's line. The reason why is because Conchobar's father is none other than Cathbad. So we could be able to say it's not just Conchobar McNassa, he is Conchobar Mac Cathbad. He is Conchobar, son of Cathbad. So when she is out, Nessa is out doing her championing around, she comes across Cathbad, who's out doing his championing around. And the story that we have is that He comes upon her, Coffat comes upon Nessa while she is bathing herself, and he is said to seize upon her, and they foregather, and then she becomes his beloved wife, and bears for him the son, who will be known then as Conchobar MacCoffad or Conchobar McNassa. Now, there is, of course, multiple pre-stories, and this is again the tidings of the birthing of Conchobar McNassa, Conchobar McCoffat. So we have this Druid character who's brother to the king in Ulster, going around having all of his scraps, and then he has found someone who is like, rivaling him in fighting, I guess, and then they come together and they bear a child. It gets a bit weirder though, folks, because Fergus MacRoss, brother to Cathbad MacRoss, fancies Nessa, and so he asks if she'll be with him. Now, at this point, it doesn't say if there's a divorce has happened somewhere along the way, but Cathbad, the Druid, is not around at this point. But Nesta decides, yeah, okay, I'll be with you for a year. I'll be your wife for a year, which was quite common. There were multiple different types of marriages in ancient Ireland, and one was a marriage for a year and a day, which was a union at the end of which people just go their own ways. Now, whether or not Nessa and Coffin had that as well, don't know for sure. But at the time that Fergus approaches her, she's unwed. Now, Nessa, being very smart as she is, decides, yes, absolutely, I'll be your wife for a year and a day if you let my son be king for a year and a day. And so this is how Fergus Ross ends up stepping down from being king, and Conchobar, the now grown Conchobar, steps in to be king in Ulster. At which point, very sharp Nessa tells Conchobar to take all of the wealth that he can get his hands on and give it to all of these particular individuals, all of these influential people in Ulster. That way, when the year and a day is up, and Fergus is like, yep, it was great, thank you very much, I'll have the seat of the king back. Conchobar is like, well, let's just ask the people who they would prefer to be king. And because he has taken all of the wealth and distributed it to these influential individuals, they all cry for him to remain as king. This sets up the stage for the difficulty between Fergus and Coffin that leads to Fergus taking the branch of the older court and warriors into exile, which then centers a core element of the narrative around the Tomb of Cooley, the cattle raid of Cooley, and why Fergus MacRoss, the former king of Ulster, is actually fighting on the side of Queen Maeve of Connacht, who is also a lover of his later on in the narrative. But Coffin is still core here, because we have Coffin who has brought Conchobar into the world, but there's another individual who is directly daughter of, in this case, Coffin, and that is Conchobar's sister, which is Dector. Now, Dector comes into the narrative very interestingly. It doesn't say exactly who Dector's mother is, but she is said to be the brother of Conchobar. We find Dector in a number of different ways because she and 50 maidens of the Ulster court are turned into birds and they disappear into the other world. And then Conchobar sets out with his warriors to try and find the women and bring them back. And all of these stories are in the birth tale of none other than Cú Chulainn. And so the warrior, Setanta MacSultam, who will become Cú Chulainn, is said to be the son of Dector. Dector being the daughter of Coffin. So Cú Chulainn, this central core narrative figure to the entire Ulster cycle, his granddad is Coffin, this druid who, again, isn't placed core in many of the narratives, but is just there slightly to the side, influencing everything as it goes along, nudging and changing and shifting the narratives. We see this more clearly again when later on the young child Setanta MacSultam is schooling in Ellen Macha, and Coffin, who is training specifically 8 boys at this particular time, falls into a vision and says that today is an auspicious day, and the person who takes up arms today will become renowned through all of time. They'll live a short life, but they will be remembered. At which point, this impressionable young child, Setanta, rushes off because he has to become that person. Now, I've done other videos about Cú Chulainn, but so we're going to keep the focus here on Coffin. But it's Coffin's vision that sets up Cú Chulainn's joyride and murder fest as he takes up arms on that day. So it's almost Coffin, again, nudging and influencing the narrative of Setanta's destiny, or Setanta's approach toward destiny. So whether it's a true vision or not, it is said that he falls into a vision and then he's like, oh, this is exactly what that means. but that then shifts things specifically for Satanta. It's not the only time it happens though, because in that famous story about Satanta's boyhood deeds, where he is left behind when they're going to the warriors' feast in the blacksmith's house of Cullen, and he arrives late and he battles the dog, the great guard dog of Cullen, and slays it by well, in the stories I learned as a kid, he uses hurl and fires the ball, the leather ball, the schlitter, into the dog's mouth, and the dog chokes and dies. In the actual translations of the story, though, it causes the dog to choke and stop in its pounce, at which point the child Satanta grabs the dog by the tail and smashes its head off a rock in a much more brutal form of finishing move death for the poor hound. At which point all the Conchobar king in Ulster at this point, and Cathbad, and all of these other influential people come running out going, oh shit, the boy child is going to be murdered by the dog. And they find instead that the dog has been murdered by the boy. Here is where Cathbad's influence kicks in again, because Cathbad says that, oh well, like Satanta, you must now take on the name of Cú Chulainn. The boy is like, I don't want the name. I am Satanta Mac Sultan. That is my name. But Cathbad again pushes and says, if you take on this name, this is the name that will be remembered down through all of time. So then again, Satanta turns around and says, yeah, okay, I'll take the name Cú Chulainn on the understanding that I will be the guard dog, the hound of Cullen, until such time as I can raise a new dog to replace me in the guard dog duties. So this druid in Ulster, this individual, through all of the narratives, we wouldn't have the Ulster cycle as we know it if it wasn't for Conchobar being born of Cathbad, Dectra being born, and like her son then becoming Satanta, who becomes Cú Chulainn. If it wasn't for the machinations between Nessa and Conchobar because of Cathbad, we wouldn't have had the split between Cathbad and Fergus MacRoss, Fergus going to Connacht, and then that sets up everything for that rivalry in the Táin. Now, I did a class in the Irish Pagan School. It's Heroes and Villains of Ancient Ulster, where I go through the Ulster cycle and take time to look at as many of these individuals as I can. I refer to it as heroes and villains, because it's not exactly simple to say who is a hero and who is a villain. But for me, in my personal opinion, looking at everything that Kaffa does time and again, he is twisting, shifting, manipulating, and changing the course of everything to suit his own ends. And that doesn't exactly ring as heroic circumstances, in my opinion. So hopefully this has been interesting. If you'd like to take the class, Heroes and Villains, I have a link down below over at the Irish Pagan School. If you're not ready to take a full class, go to irishpagan.school/free, and you can pick up some free resources there to just dip your toe in and get started with Irish mythology, culture, heritage, and spirituality. Until next time, look after yourself. Take care. Agus slán. Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a positive review in your podcast listener. Then head over to irishpaganschool.com and enroll in one of our free or paid courses. Slán go fóill, and we will see you next time.